everybody. Welcome to our next episode of Future Focused CXOs. I have a very exciting guest today, Bradley Enneking. He's the Chief Information Officer at Heartland Financial USA. Without any further delay, let me welcome Bradley to our podcast. Bradley, welcome to the show. If you can introduce yourself, and then we can get into the conversation.
Sure. Thanks, Jay. So again, Brad Enneking, CIO at HTLF, a little bit easier and shorter than Heartland Financial. I manage all of technology at a $20 billion mid-sized regional bank. We primarily focus on commercial customers, but we do also have a large retail presence. So I manage the infrastructure teams, the data teams, the application teams, and the digital teams. So really anything that has to do with technology is in my space. My background, I've been with HTLF for about 4 years, spent 10 years prior at Wells Fargo. And then prior to that was in consulting, spent a number of years working with a number of different verticals, a little bit of varied experience. And our focus now is really about figuring out what the bank of the future looks like, because the landscape is shifting pretty significantly. Very few people come into branches anymore. Everything's digital, everything's online. And the story I like to tell is about my kids, because I've been in banking directly for over 15 years, but my kids don't actually bank at a bank. They have alternative methods to do what they do, right?
As we talked earlier, you started out your first consulting business at 15 and a half. So what drove you to take the leap into entrepreneurship at such a young age? And how did that experience shape your career path?
Yeah, so my dad started a company repairing memory cores. And I don't know if you know what memory cores are, but back in the day, we used to literally wrap wire around a piece of metal, and that's how you store data. And so as the world was transforming over to microchips, there was still a lot of infrastructure that still had these memory cores, and nobody would support them. So we actually did pretty well with that business. We started that business when I was about 7 or 8. And so it was something that was always on my mind. That seemed pretty interesting. That seemed pretty exciting. I also grew up in a small town, and so there weren't a whole lot of opportunities. I had jobs working at a grocery store and realized pretty quickly that neither of those was really for me. And at that time, computers were just starting to break onto the scene, and people were, I think, wondering what could be done with them. Yeah, and you used this thing. There were a number of local companies that were trying to figure out exactly that. What do I do with these computers? And I was also figuring things out as I went along, but I knew a little bit. I was willing to try new things. I was a default expert there. And I was fortunate that my dad had a business in the community. He knew a lot of business leaders. So I was able to make those connections pretty easily and helped with whatever people needed doing. Sometimes it was just training. Sometimes it was building out. The first application I wrote was an inventory system, and on the Apple II Plus, just whatever came along, right? So engaging in a number of different scenarios with a number of different technologies and situations really helped me be more nimble, think on my feet a little bit better, and apply lessons learned in one area to a different area. And I think the biggest thing that came out of that for me that really impacted my career was to be curious, to ask questions.
Yes.
It was a great situation because very few people knew what was happening. So it was all about finding people who did know, asking those questions. I see a lot of discussions, and as you work on yourself, about being vulnerable. And I think that was something, especially with asking questions and really admitting that you don't know everything, that was a good lesson. So for me, it's driven a much greater understanding of how things work, certainly on the technology side. But I think more importantly, as the role of the CIO evolves on the business side, because no longer is the CIO, or really any level of technology, where you can hide out in the corner and not really understand how the business works. Especially as you move up in the ranks. Yeah. So I think that has really been a key differentiator in my career, that curiosity, just really a drive to understand how things work, but then a lot of interaction with people, with stakeholders, with business owners, with business users. It helps a lot in translating technology to business, simplifying it for people. And so you can bridge that gap between technology, which is scary to a lot of people, and make it a little bit more accessible.
Yeah, you have a deep expertise into technical background, software development, right? You also spent a lot of time in consulting, right? And being entrepreneur at heart and having that curiosity of asking questions, which is, I think, the core of an entrepreneur. Why he becomes an entrepreneur? Because he doesn't get answers and he says, okay, I will build something, right? Because I
Right.
can't find
Right.
anything, right? So that is there in you. My question to you is, how does this technical background, software development to consulting helped you take a leadership roles at a bigger banks like Wells Fargo? Because it's a completely different setup compared to where you come from.
Yeah, I'll talk about banking specifically, but I think it applies to every industry, at least to a certain extent. And so, one of the defining traits of financial services organizations, especially banks, is being so highly regulated. They tend to be pretty conservative. And in consulting, there's a constant push to learn, to try new things, push the envelope, stay ahead of the curve. And those really seem like opposite philosophies. And I think, really in a lot of ways they are, but there is still opportunity for balance. When I think in banking and healthcare, two of the most highly regulated industries, there's just a really strong tendency to not try to move forward, to not try new things. Again, because there's a lot of risk associated with doing that. You don't want to impact patients, you don't want to impact your customers' financial well being. I believe that most people in banking have this embedded mindset of being risk averse, but still open to ideas that make more money while managing risk. It's still a business after all. So there's still that pressure, especially in banking, because I talked about what does the bank of the future look like? And there's more and more pressure on banks in particular to move forward. And it's pushing more creativity, more openness to being able to explore a little bit. So I think for me, it's a matter of really understanding the needs of the risk and compliance space while communicating the benefits effectively. And so, again, going back to time in consulting and working with a lot of different customers and having them all come from different areas. So, you're working with automotive group, they have a certain focus and a certain way of doing things. And there are areas where they're interested in exploring, and there are areas where they're not. But then you go to financial services, and that's completely different. There's a lot of variability there. So it's really understanding what are the levers we can pull. And I think time in consulting really helped with that, where getting involved in software development and also to a large extent consulting is you end up in a lot of different situations where you have to react to changing circumstances. And so when I got into banking, it was really just another, probably not a great way to say this, but another customer. So how do I understand what this customer really needs? How do I understand where this customer is going? And how do I understand how to work best with this customer? And then over time, that mentality shifts. As I stayed more in the banking space, that mentality shifted more to this is my space. How do I work best within this space? Understanding the big picture, understanding why things are the way they are. I think one of my biggest learning curves was understanding all the regulations that are associated with banking. But I think fundamentally, what helped me the most coming out of consulting was that mindset of curiosity, but also pushing the envelope, really pushing things forward, because you just don't find that in financial services, in most financial services. Certainly the fintech area, you've got a lot of great thinkers who are really pushing the envelope.
So in light of that, understanding regulations, were there any other challenges to adapting to this environment that when it came to an older industry is more conservative and its change management styles, it's a resistance to new ideas because it needs to be stable, which is respectable. I want my bank safe, right? At the same time, we also have the expectation that it should be easy to use and approachable of where I am, find me where I am, instead of me having to do all the work towards the bank. So what kind of other challenges cropped up as you were making that transition?
Yeah, so there were a lot of conversations early on that started with, you can't do that here. So for a period of time, it was really frustrating because a lot of the basic activities had significant overhead associated with them. So if you work at a smaller company and you want to deploy and update some sort of augmentation to your software, you just do it. When you might need a change request and you might need to go through a couple of hoops there, but that was measured in hours or a couple of days. But when you get into these really mature environments, these highly regulated environments, it could take weeks. My biggest challenge throughout was if you wanted to work with a new vendor or if you wanted to purchase a new product from an existing vendor, minimum of 6 months of being able to do that process. So then you really have to ask yourself, how can you be nimble in an environment like that? As the organization grows, there's a lot of momentum. So just the less nimble you can be, that doesn't negate the need for having to be nimble. So really, that was the biggest challenge. There was extraordinary amount of overhead, there's extraordinary amount of lead time. And so one of the most important steps early on was understanding why. Why are the processes designed as they are? Why do things work this way? And that was really key to figuring out how we can streamline, how we can plan ahead better, how we can move faster without breaking the process, but we might have to bend it a little bit. And then the other biggest challenge is this, I call it narrow lane mentality, which is basically the idea that people stay in their lanes. This is my job. This is what I do. And if it looks like or feels like it's out of my lane, then I'm not going to do it. And my experience is the larger the organization, the more people fit into their lanes, and then the narrower the lanes become. And I was very used to doing whatever it takes to get the job done and people wearing multiple hats. And so that was a significant departure. And it was a challenge throughout my tenure there at Wells Fargo in particular. And so I'm not saying every organization is like that. And I'm not saying that Wells Fargo is universally like that. It's just that it's a different mindset. And you really have to make a choice if you're going to engage in that and try to continue to make improvements, or there's pretty strong gravity around just settling in your lane. It's easy to do at a place like that. So that was another pretty significant challenge. And I remember telling a bunch of people when I started, if I get into that mentality, then you need to let me know because I need to leave and go someplace else because then I'm not contributing anymore. Yeah, exactly. The solution, not that there is a silver bullet there, but it was really, again, to understand how things worked and then to start to build relationships instead of having to enter 5 different requests to 5 different people. You just pick up the phone and say, hey, this is what I'm trying to do. What's the fastest way for me to do that? And then you can start to work that out.
So that's really fascinating. I just want to cover that. As a consultant or working in a smaller organization, you were able to take a lot more autonomy to make changes quickly. But basically making one change at a small company takes fewer people. Now success at a large organization, and especially a regulated organization, a lot more stakeholders you've got to win. And so it sounds like one of the things you added, okay, I want to enhance this software or add this vendor or whatever you want to do, includes I need to get all these relationships on board in order to get this through. So the actual success of a new vendor project or a upgrade involves all these relationship and stakeholder buy-in, where it didn't require that as much in smaller organization because they didn't really need that. And I imagine that's by design. Again, they need to have a good compliance. They need to have it reviewed, or you end up in a CrowdStrike situation.
See, you spoke about developing these innovative products, right? Navigating through these challenges of very matured environment where compliance is high and other things. Could you tell us little more details about maybe some specific project or to your point, you were saying bank of the future. Now, how do you really take these kind of organizations, highly regulated, matured organizations where change is not very easy to make? How do you take them to bank of the future? What strategy would you use and how would you take them there?
Yeah. So I'll talk about a couple of different projects that we did back from my consulting days, and then I'll circle back to a little bit more directly that question in banking. I would say not my first project, but my first real foray into international business, offshore manufacturing was a dog collar light, just really simple product. It literally was a dog collar that has a LED light on it. And when you're walking your dog at night, provides visibility for you, provides visibility for the dog, and also others can see you. Really useful product. So the investor started working with us to do the design, which we did, and then also do the first production run of some number of units to test market and make sure they were putting it out there. Pretty successful, well received. And they started wanting to move manufacturing over to China, which is logical because the cost difference is pretty significant. And so we consulted with them because with this product in particular, it was so simple. Intellectual property laws just aren't as robust. We said, hey, if you do this, there's a good chance that other products are going to show up pretty quickly.
Yeah.
So I started working with somebody else, and they did outsource to China. And within 2 months, there were a number of competitors that were on the shelves in every location they were at, as well as a number of other locations. So the company was out of business within a year because they couldn't compete anymore in the market that they had effectively created. While they probably wouldn't have lasted forever because it was a relatively easy product to replicate, they certainly would have had a long and profitable run, at least until everybody caught up. So what that really drove home is that you really have to understand the big picture. You really have to understand the strategy that's associated with what you're doing. And so they were very tactical about just generating more profit now and really ignored the warning signs that if they follow this path, short term, it may work out for them, but long term, it won't. And so that's a lesson that has always stuck with me. So shifting over to innovation a little bit more, back in my consulting days, we had a product, we were working on a product that is a boiler and chiller controller. So not something a lot of people think about, right? But it manages large building heating and cooling. And so it was an underserved market, didn't benefit from a lot of innovation because there just weren't a lot of players. People weren't paying a lot of attention there. And so as a small company, this was our largest product. And there was constant price pressure from our customer. And the exciting outcome to me was that we continued to innovate, and we had to innovate because of this price pressure. How do we reduce the cost and maintain the quality? So it became part of our organization's DNA because every day we would come in and we would say, how can we make this product cheaper? How can we make this product better? And then again, going back to the consulting days and saying, hey, I have a situation here. Maybe I can apply that situation over elsewhere.
Mm-hmm.
And so that innovative mindset really became part of the DNA of the organization. And the innovation that we did in one place, we were able to leverage elsewhere, whether that was a cheaper product or a different way of building the circuit. The result of that pressure driving the need to innovate has stayed with me for the last 20 years of my career. And so I really focus on replicating the feeling of that element, forcing innovation. I think that's a little bit strong, but you really want that incentive there. And so that continuous sense of urgency that pushes people to take the next steps when they otherwise may not. When I started in this particular role, I started thinking about what is that driver? What is going to make us innovate? What is going to make us think differently, try new things, push the envelope? And it's really that bank of the future mentality. Or if you flip that to the other side, banking is dying. Banking as it has existed is dying. Certainly not dying. We're going to need that, I think, forever. But the form that it takes is changing and changing rapidly. So the mindset that I've focused on and worked to pass on to my team is that we have an existential crisis coming. So how can we do it better? How can we do it different? How can we move the needle? How can we move it forward?
So let me ask you, as a CIO, how do you approach the build versus buy decision in your technology now? You've instigated this idea of innovation, and then of course you have to make these technical decisions like, do we make this ourselves? Should we buy it? What kind of approach do you take as a CIO, especially in this regulated industry, to make these kind of decisions when it comes to how you innovate in your technology?
I think you really have to be deliberate. You really have to be selective. At the end of the day, banking is really about risk management. Obviously, it's a business, you want to make money, but it really comes down to risk management. And I think every financial institution jokes that their risk group's end state is actually no customers, because then there would be no risk if you didn't have any customers. So, and banking is also an old industry. So anything that can be done has already been done. There's a technology solution for just about every aspect of banking. And each bank has their own special sauce, whether it's a niche that they focus on, underwriting process, credit profiles, predictive analytics, whatever that is. And so there are tweaks to the fundamental process of banking. As a result, when I look at build versus buy, there are a few criteria that I consider. Is a build approach going to differentiate us in a meaningful way? Is it going to increase revenue? Is it going to increase customer retention? Is it going to decrease cost? Typical questions that you would ask. Customer retention is higher on our list than even increasing revenue or decreasing cost, because the more customers we can keep as a general rule, the more revenue we get and we succeed as a business. Certainly there are exceptions to that, but as a general rule, you want to drive in that direction. And is a build approach going to be easier to maintain and support? I think any CIO, anybody in technology has been down that path. It's, wow, this would be great to build, but there's so much overhead to support and maintain it that you start to eat into whatever benefit that you expected or that you got when you built it yourself. And then is a build approach going to be viable from a risk management perspective? That's just a reality that we have to deal with. And a lot of times vendors will take on regulatory requirements and liability, which is a very attractive proposition to any financial institution. You're like, I don't have to worry about that. So most banks farm out their online banking platform. There are ADA, Americans with Disabilities regulations that you need to pay attention to. There are a number of regulatory disclosure issues that you have to deal with. Farming that out takes a lot of that off the plate. And so I think there's an additional complication that you see in banking or regulated industries that you may not see as much in other industries. What we look for is those truly differentiating factors, like how is this going to really impact us in a positive way? There's been a trend across industries, but being a little bit myopic in the banking industry, where vendors will bring a core functionality to the table, but they'll allow it to be configurable. We're looking at a number of online banking platforms where we'll call it the boring bank stuff, like actually moving money and doing transactions and making payments. They bring an engine for that because there's a lot of complexity that's built into that. They'll bring a default user interface, but it's a highly customizable user interface. And so that's really been our focus for the majority of the solutions that we've been looking for, especially for the past 2 years. I'm looking for the best of both worlds in that case. So I'd love to be able to buy the boring stuff, and I really want to build the differentiator. I want to be able to build that full ecosystem of customer experience. I want my online banking to look the same for them. I want my account opening solution, my loan application solution. I want that all to look the same because I built it to match what our vision is, and our brand and everything else.
No, that is a great summarization, saying that if it is a differentiator, if it is core to your bank or to your business, then you build it, right? Because it's going to be long-term to you, right? But if it's something that is already been innovated, but highly configurable type of solution, I would like to buy it and configure it for myself, right? I have a follow-up question onto that. And selfish to me and some of our viewers also, when you decide to build, right? How do you make a decision of whether I will build it with my people or I will build it taking a consulting partner? I will outsource it versus I will staff augment it as one team. How do you make all of these choices?
Great question. There are a few things that you really need to balance there as well. And one of the considerations that's always top of mind for me is how are we going to support it after? So if I hire consultants to build a cool new tool, 2 days of knowledge transfer at the end isn't going to position my team to be able to maintain that going forward. So I have to decide if I want to maintain that consulting firm or maintain somebody to support that for me, which usually isn't the most optimal financial decision. So typically, if we're going to build something, I want to support that internally. I also, having been in consulting for a long time and having the same experiences most people in technology have, is it's a little bit hit or miss with consulting companies that you work with. And so if you find a good one, you really want to hang on to them. But understanding how consulting works and understanding how just-in-time consulting is. So if you win a project and you need 5 developers, you might have 3 on the bench, but now you need to staff 2. So you go out to the marketplace and you bring 2 in who you may or may not have worked with before. You've got a fair amount of risk working with a consulting company. So there are a couple of considerations. One is, what does my relationship with the consulting company look like? How involved can my team be in the development? In fact, the last 3 or 4 years, I will put that in the contract that my team actually has to participate in the execution. And that has eliminated some vendors where they're just not interested in doing that because it adds more overhead to them. It adds more risk on the delivery side to them. Flipping the script there, they don't know if our resources are any good. My area is really just making sure that we can maintain it and support it in a reasonable way. Now, the other significant factor is, what about skill set? What about capabilities? Do we have experience with the technology? So when we started to do some more advanced work with Salesforce and some of their Experience Cloud customer facing work, we had never done that before. So we needed to bring in a consulting firm that had experience with that to build the foundation for us and start and help us learn that. But there again, what really paid off was this idea that my team is going to be part of the execution team. Maybe we're doing 5% of the work, but that means we're in the meetings, we're part of the planning, we're part of the execution, we get our hands on the technology, and that makes such a huge difference in the end state when we have to take it over. There are a number of different factors there. And I'd say I'm a little jaded on using consultants because having been over there and understanding a little bit how that works, if you got a job at a factory making hot dogs, you'd never eat a hot dog again. I might have a little bit of a different view, but that's really the key piece. How are we going to carry that forward? But it is a great way to have your staff learn. So there are great advantages to it, but you just have to be deliberate about engaging consultants.
Looking back at your career journey from 15 entrepreneur to now as a CIO, what do you consider your proudest professional achievement? And how did that shape your personal values and your professional outlook?
It's changed over time. When I was a developer, my focus was producing functional code that was high quality and met requirements. I could sit down and just focus on that. When there were always diversions with lines of code and extreme modularity and other fads at various times, but at the end of the day, the goal was really pretty simple. I needed to produce functional code that did what it was supposed to do. And so the most difficult part of transitioning from being a developer to being a manager was not producing something tangible every day. So as a result, I had to figure out, what value do I bring to the table? When after some time searching core values as a manager, I really came to the realization that the best thing I could do was to build the best teams. So my measurables are curiosity, passion for what they do, and a drive to get things done. So at the end of the day, if the people on my team have those attributes, then I can help them grow beyond their current capabilities, and maybe more importantly, the limits that they've put on their capabilities. So when I think about my proudest professional achievement, having those that reported to me in a number of different organizations either succeed me when I moved on or go to their own high growth careers. When another badge of honor, if you will, is managing people out of different organizations. So if they're not a good fit, you have to manage them up or out. Being proud of that tends to be a little polarizing, but at the end of the day, I found that being really proactive in managing people for the benefit of the organization, and it also benefits the employees involved, because if they're not producing to the level that they need to, it probably means it's not a good fit for whatever reason. Maybe not a good cultural fit, maybe not a good skill fit. So they'll have to either align their focus to the organization or find an organization more aligned to their approach. Either way, I think the opportunities to exceed are improved as a result of the change. It's building the best teams I can. It's building high functioning teams. And I think a big part of that people don't talk about a lot is you have to have the right people in that mix. Sometimes you have to manage people out. Sometimes you have to work with people, give them an opportunity to succeed. But when I left Wells, as an example, one of my managers took my role when I left. And there are a number of others that have left and gone to other organizations. A number of them are directors in the technology space in other organizations. I look at that, and if I had a 5% impact on that, that feels great. I'm really focused on success being all about people. I think the critical aspect of that is their alignment to the culture. I strongly feel that the vast majority of people want to do their best, but sometimes they just don't have the environment to do. So my primary goal is to provide an environment where people can do their best work. They can learn and grow while being accountable. And I think that's the other aspect that I'm not sure gets enough focus. And so once people understand what those expectations are, and it's my job to communicate those, and they're held to those expectations, and it's my job to hold them to those expectations, then they really tend to thrive. If you know what you need to do well, you're going to do that. So I think that's really the biggest impact. Proudest thing that I focus on is not so much a moment, but it's just watching the people that I work with grow and expand their capabilities, expand their roles, and really come into their own. I was talking to my team the other day. My company is in the middle of being acquired. Our first meeting with the company that was acquiring us, I told them, I'm going to talk for 2 minutes at the front and I'm going to talk for 2 minutes at the back. But I said, I don't want to say anything otherwise because this is your show. I want to showcase you and what you've done and the capabilities that you have. The end result of that was they kept everybody that reported to me. So again, along those lines, if there's a proudest moment, it's probably that. And again, if I had 5% to do with that, then that's enough for me.
No, that's great. That doesn't happen in bank mergers very often.
Before I ask you our concluding question, we can't not talk about AI. AI is something that we definitely want to talk about. So I would like to get your views on the entire AI spectrum, right? The predictive AI to Gen AI to LLM models to chatbots to people also using data clouds now, right? SAP, Salesforce, everybody has come up with that, consolidating the data and giving you the insight. So what are your views on that and which areas you feel will seriously impact or provide maximum ROI, especially in terms of user experience, in terms of banking experience?
Sure. Again, I have to go back to banking being highly regulated, right? So there are some pretty significant headwinds to being able to adopt AI. So we've taken the approach of just focusing on a handful of use cases that are not customer facing. Because of the risk aspect, the first thing that I did with my team is we built out an AI governance model. And if companies don't have those now, they're going to need those. And that was a necessary step for us to get buy-in from our risk and compliance folks. It was something that we would need when we got audited, and we have an audit coming up. We're polishing up all of our AI governance to make sure we can have those conversations with our auditors. There was some additional groundwork for us to lay. While we were doing that, Microsoft came out with an OpenAI version that didn't ingest data. And so one of the major concerns that we had was ingesting our data into a larger model that was available to the public. So once we got over that, then we started building out POCs as fast as we could. So the first one was a job description generator, and type in some basic information about the job, and then OpenAI would generate a job description for you. Our HR team absolutely loved it. It saved them quite a bit of time generating job descriptions or refining job descriptions or standardizing job descriptions. Give it some rules and it'll redo all of your job description for you. So that's really been great. And then we looked at some other things like contract review. We have a checklist of 15 things that we need to see in contracts. So again, easy enough to set up, easy enough to build, but internally. So we really focused on a lot of efficiency items. Great partnership from the risk folks, again, because risk was really limited. As a result of that environment, we've really looked at the idea of assistants or agents or co-pilots or whatever you want to call them. And a couple of examples, and the primary one we're looking at now is with customer care. So for our call center, if somebody calls in, they go into our IVR system, and then they get kicked over to our Salesforce system. And then that's where our call center agents would pick up that call. By the time they do that, they already know who's calling, but they don't have a lot of information about them because they just don't have time between the time the call comes in and then the time they have to answer the phone to do a lot of research. So what we're really focusing on is building a bot. Co-pilot has been my favorite word lately. So we build a co-pilot that will do the research and it will bring up salient points about that customer. Hey, this customer called in yesterday, or they entered a complaint a couple of days ago, or they have $10 million in deposits with us. It immediately gives that customer care agent much more context about how they should interact with the customer. And we're starting to move into a little bit of upselling as well. Hey, you know what? They're not registered for online banking, or they have a checking account, not a savings account, or they have a HELOC that they're not using. And so it gives them an opportunity to really grow the role of the customer care agent, but makes them significantly better at their job because now it's like they know this person. It's really personalized. And then the next phase is to extend that to the sales team. Same thing. So you're going on a sales call. What do I need to know about this customer? They called the call center a couple of times in the last 2 weeks. This was why they called. They've registered a couple of complaints. They have this much on deposit. So instead of spending hours trying to figure that out
Doing that
or
research.
not knowing it at all, because they didn't have insight into customer care center, they didn't have insight into necessarily all the products they had with us. Not only does it accelerate and save time, but it also makes them significantly more prepared for those discussions. And so again, we've really focused on areas that aren't customer facing, because as soon as we cross into that space, then the risk ratchets up significantly. But I think there's enough room for growth without moving into the direct customer space that we've got a lot of runway. Customer facing is just looking at personalization on our online banking site in particular. So you log into online banking, we know what your historic transactions are, we know if you've had concerns about service, then we can start to adjust your experience when you are customer facing applications to be able to make sure you have what you need, maybe give you a better interest rate because you had a concern about a charge, or maybe refund a charge, things like that. So knowing you better, but having access to that data provides us with a lot of opportunities without moving into dangerous territory. And so there are a couple of other things that are related. I think there's growing recognition of just how important data is. And so everything I just described, it's critical that we have data in place. So another initiative that we've had for 18 months is implementing a data governance program, making sure our data quality is where it needs to be. The AI work that we're doing and the data governance work that we're doing really go hand in hand. And the last thing I'll say I found really interesting about the AI landscape, especially over the last 9 months or so, is that vendors are embracing it and it's starting to get meaningful. Meaning the vendors were embracing the hype and they're like, oh, we have AI this, we have AI that. When you look under the covers, it really wasn't. But now we're starting to see more value coming out. Just a simple example. So I'll go back to the job description generator that we built. About 3 months after we built that, Workday, which is our HRIS system, came out with a new module that, guess what? It generates job description. Yeah, using Gen AI, right? So you have to be cognizant of that. And as a leader, you need to make sure that you're investing in an area that's going to be meaningful. So there are tools that are out there. So it goes back again to that build versus buy, right? So what makes the most sense for us in that space? The liability equation is a little bit different with AI because we haven't figured a lot of it out yet. So we buy a product and there's hallucination in that product that ends up costing us $1 million because the contract language was wrong. Who has that liability? I don't think that's been fully worked out yet. As leaders, we really have to pay attention to make sure we're covering all the bases there. Probably one of the most exciting things that has happened in my career, that the advent of AI, right, and the acceptance of it, and a lot of exciting possibilities. It's a bit of a minefield.
It is.
It's great. I'm so excited.
This is really interesting. You started your career working on memory coils and working through AI. That said, with you having that breadth of knowledge, being able to use an Apple II as well as AI, what kind of advice would you give to others that are looking into moving into the path of a C-suite executive, trying to figure out how to manage a linear or nonlinear path in that direction?
I had a great mentor a number of years ago. She was the chief customer officer in one of the lines of business in Wells Fargo. So we were having lunch one day and I just asked her, how did you get into your role? And she said, I had no intention of ever getting this role. She said, I started out in the call center part-time. And I was only doing it because we had just had our second child and you need to make ends meet. And she said, but I just asked questions. I was curious about everything and I kept asking questions. And she said, at the end of the day, I was such a pain in the ass that they just gave me the responsibility of answering those questions and solving those problems. And I thought, wow, that's fascinating. And so I really took that to heart. I've got this theme of curiosity that I really focus on. I do the same thing. And that's the advice that I give to people as well. If you're curious, you can do anything. You can learn anything. You build relationships that way by asking questions. And people love it when they're able to share their knowledge with somebody. For me, it's asking questions. Why does this work this way? And then you have to take it to the next step, which is, I think we can make this work better. And the other piece of advice I'll pass along that I'm really working through myself right now is I listen to this cast on the perfect job and people who love their jobs. And there was this universal view that you never find the perfect job. You might find a good job, but you never find the perfect job, and you never find a job that you love. Rarely, I should say. You make it. And that really resonates with me as well. So as you think about this idea of being curious about how things work and asking questions and trying to make things better, that's a great way to continue to refine the job you have today. But it's also a great way to position yourself to get the job that you want tomorrow. Because the more you learn, the more you make things better, the more you improve things, the easier your current job is for you and the better position you are for the next job. There's not a magic bullet, but I think curiosity
Great
is
advice.
the
Yeah.
number one. Yeah, it's just the number one skill.
Thank you so much. I
Excellent.
think excellent advice, right? Ask questions, make sure you can make it better, have that attitude. And I believe there is no perfect job, right? You have to make the job perfect.
Yeah,
Great advice.
exactly.
Thank you so much. It is such a pleasure talking to you.
Thank you so much.
This was a lot of fun. I enjoyed it.